All right, good morning, everyone. I am going to give you my testimony, which, to be honest with you, I have not thought about in a long time, and it is amazing to run through the whole process of my life and think about it, and think about the time the Lord interjected himself into my life, weaving in and out, and the day he saved me. And I encourage you to do it if you haven't rethought the whole process. If it's besides being edifying to yourself, you never know when you might be called upon for the next one. So be prepared. I got a little bit of a knot in my stomach, though. I am nervous, but we'll see if that loosens up a bit.
Go ahead and turn the mic up for you then.
Okay, is it? Yeah, I got to remember to hold it to my mouth. I'm sorry. If you heard Dwayne's testimony, I think Dwayne was raised in the church, and so his testimony is what I would call one type. The other type, I think there's three basically. The other type is kind of the person that's raised in the church and has the prodigal son rebellion experience that goes away and gets brought back. Those two aren't me. Mine is completely Gentile, hedonistic, pagan life, and the Lord grabbed me. My kind of conversion looks like an explosion, but this I know about all three. All three require regeneration, and all three are a miracle. So mine is no more spectacular than Dwayne's, even though Dwayne's looks like a subtle merging into the Lord, whereas mine was an explosion kind of thing. But all miracles, I'm saying. So let me give you a little backstory about how I grew up, and that'll kind of set the stage for the big event, as I like to call it. I grew up with parents that were, one was a Mormon, my mom, and my dad was pretty much non-religious about anything. He had been raised with a certain amount of church going in his youth and Bible study, but he rejected that, and there wasn't a religious bone in his body as I was growing up, and to my remembrance. He came from a family that was pretty dysfunctional. His dad drank a lot. Both his parents, my grandparents, died in their early 50s, one from emphysema and the other one for cancer, but their health choices were pretty bad. Drank a lot. My dad was fond of saying that they had to move every time the rent was due, so kind of a broken family situation. So as a consequence, I think my dad and mom were both really insecure. My mom came out of a family that my grandfather left them when she was 12. Basically, it started another family. She found out about it. She had a younger sister who had some birth defects and lots of medical bills. And so my grandfather just checked out. He couldn't handle it. So he ended up leaving. Subsequently, my mom felt responsible somehow at age 12 that it was her fault that he left. And so from that point forward, I think my mom has probably been one of the most insecure people I've ever encountered. Just apologizing constantly for things that aren't even her fault. And then my dad has a certain amount of insecurity too because of his upbringing. So anyway, that was kind of modeled for me. My dad found, I guess, identity and comfort in drinking because it made him into a more relaxed, open person. He didn't have to feel so self-conscious. So I remember growing up, and my mom would be very controlling, nagging, wanting to make sure that I didn't get into trouble, and my dad was kind of like, whatever, go have fun. That was his motto in life. So as a result, that's kind of what I did. I remember in the 6th grade being with the neighbors and we smoking. One of them stole a can of Copenhagen from his dad. So I started chewing Copenhagen at age 12, in the 6th grade. I didn't quit till I was 26. Not that everybody, Hayden Lake was a pretty rough place to grow in. We used to jokingly say the girls bowl overhand in Hayden Lake. And a lot of them even chewed Copenhagen too. So it was a lot of peer pressure and kind of a rough spot. And as with all of us, as you're growing up, you're trying to figure out, well, who am I? You know, what's my identity? And I didn't know. So whoever I hung around with, that's basically who I became. And that's kind of the person I was up until about the 8th grade. A lot of influences from really bad neighborhood kids and stuff. Got into a lot of trouble, stealing stuff, and just generally being a pretty bad kid. Well, I had a football coach. I didn't play in the 9th grade, and I had a football coach who was kind of like no filter, just say anything he wanted to say to come out of his mouth. And he asked me, he said, well, why aren't you playing football? And I looked at him and I go, well, I don't know. And he goes, well, you should. And so I started. And I played flag football in high school, or grade school, and a little bit in 7th grade. But I did, and I did really, really good at it. And here was my next identity that I had found. All of a sudden, I went from being an insecure, quiet, kind of meek kid to being assumed that I was this tough, mean, nasty guy. And I kind of ran with it. I thought, oh, well, maybe that's who I am. And so the more I embraced that, the better I did at football, because football is a fairly aggressive sport, and you can excel by just being meaner than somebody else most of the time. So I got a lot of accolades, a lot of kudos for doing that, and the more that came on me, the more I embraced it, and the more of that persona I tried to act out, even though inside I don't really think that's who I was. It was mostly acting. Well, I got good enough, basically, to go to college. I went to Boise State on a scholarship to play football. And I thought, okay, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, and I'll be successful. I have to back up, I forgot one thing. At age 14, this kind of contributes to my insecurity and the whole identity problem. At age 14, my mom sat me down, she goes, I want you to know something. I go, well, what's that? She goes, your dad is not your dad. And I said, what do you mean he's not my dad? I've known him for as long as I've had memory. She said, no, he's not your biological dad. And she was really upset. It literally took her 14 years to tell me that news. She was so scared that I would reject her and hate her for life and whatnot. And I remember at the time, I just kind of went, yeah. So I didn't think anything of it. My dad has always been my dad, and he was a pretty good dad apart from the drinking and insecurities that he had. I remember we usually did stuff together as a family, so I didn't feel neglected or anything. But after that point, I had one sibling, a younger sister that was 6 years old. And after that point, I started thinking, well, maybe he loves her because she's his biological daughter, but not me as much. And that deception was never founded on any real evidence that I could come up with. It was just a thought that crept into my head. But it was an insecurity that kind of lent itself to me looking for some kind of identity or persona I later kind of figured out as we unpacked things. So anyway, back to college. I went to Boise. Okay, this is my role in life. I know who I am. I'm a tough guy, good at football, and this is my identity. Well, I got to Boise, and I was a good football player in high school, really good. At Boise, I wasn't a very good football player. I wouldn't even say I was average. I would say I was third string at best. And that took a little while to sink in, but there were some harsh realities that came before me. And I had been drinking quite a bit, because what I found with drinking is, at first it was very pleasurable. And what it did is, whenever I drank, it would free me of that self-conscious, do people like me? Do they care about me? Do they respect me? All those feelings would kind of subside, and I would just feel loose and free. And at first it was great, I really enjoyed it. So anyway, that problem kind of followed me through high school and into college. In college, where I met that reality of me not being a superstar anymore, of not even being just a regular guy, actually not even really having a place on the team, the drinking increased because that was the medicine, if you will, to overcome this identity crisis that I was having. Because I'd set myself up quite a bit to be, a star football player, and everybody's going to love me because I'm a star football player. So reality hit me in the face. GPA was about a 1.6 at that point. Start spring ball, and I'm thinking, well, maybe things will get better, and it was the one thing I was trying to excel at was staying in the gym and lifting, and I got pretty strong. But I remember our coach got hired by Iowa State, and the next day he left. And so we have a team meeting, everybody gets in, and the linebacker coach, who was my coach, said, I'm your new interim coach. Jim has left for a job at Iowa State, and I'll be taking over. And Jim was the one that sold me on coming to Boise State, and I'm going to be, this and that for him and all this stuff. Well, I found out just how much he cared about us because he was up and gone. Not that that had anything to do with my failure, because my failure had started long before that, just in the realization of the work that was going to be required and what I thought would come easy didn't anymore. So he left, and I thought, that's it. It's probably done. Well, I didn't even have to make that decision because my coach called me into his office about a week later, and he says, there's really no place for you here. You're cut, and you're done. He says, if you want to play, I can probably get you to a JC college down in California, but you're not going to have a scholarship here. So I'll see you later. So that was devastating. I mean, this 5-year period from the 9th grade on, I built this whole identity centered around this one activity of this is who I am. And somebody came up to me and said, no, that's not who you are, no longer. And I had to deal with that, which didn't come easy. I went back home feeling like a failure, feeling like there's no future for anything. I hadn't planned a future of any sort after that, So I thought I'll just do something, I guess, stumble into something. So the drinking, of course, increased because the misery kept increasing, and trying to free myself from that misery. The thing about that sin is the pleasure was gone at that point, and I was captured. I was a slave. And so it just excelled the problem and it exacerbated that. So had several girlfriends, treated all of them horribly, didn't respect them, several jobs, didn't care about them, didn't have any respect for anybody that hired me, just a dismal outlook. I went to work in Alaska for 4 years, worked 3 weeks on, made a pile of money. Within the 4 years, I made right around, I figured out $430,000. Came home for 3 weeks after working, 110 hours a week, blew it all, would walk right through it. The house we were living in at one time, me and a bunch of my old friends, was for sale for $44,000. I thought I could buy this in half a year. Nah, I don't want that kind of responsibility. So at the end of a 4-year job, making that kind of money, I had a pair of speakers to show for it. That was all I had. So you can see these failures just racking up, one upon another, without any idea of who I was, where I was going, and just didn't know. At that point, I thought, all I want to do is escape. I mean, I wasn't really suicidal or anything like that. I don't mean escape in that regard, but I mean, get out of my environment, try to get a fresh take on something. So some friends of mine introduced me to the girl's younger sister. She was 6 years younger than me. at the time, which seemed really strange. And I thought, no, I can't do that. I mean, that's just weird. So I asked her out on a date, and we did get together, and I thought, well, I guess she kind of has a plan and some idea where she's going. I'll follow her, even though I'm 6 years older than her. That's how aimless I was. I had no target that I was aiming at all, other than, trying to live for the weekend, because that's the only time I felt any real relief. And she had some issues too that she was dealing with, and so she thought it would be a good idea to leave Coeur d'Alene also. We were both, I was raised in Coeur d'Alene. She's from Coeur d'Alene. So I had a job offer over in Seattle, and I decided, well, let's go to Seattle. We'll move over there. Talk to her parents. They liked me for some reason. I get no evidence to have anything about me to like, but I think they said, here's my daughter, go, see ya, type thing. And we moved over to Seattle. And she got a job. I had lined up this job already, and it was a job that I worked with guys who were cocaine addicts. And what we would do is we'd install commercial cabinetry in office buildings downtown Seattle, different medical buildings and things. These guys would go on a 4-day work binge of about 18 hours a day, and then wouldn't show up for 3 or 4 days afterwards because they burnt themselves out. And as low as I was with drinking at that point, I looked at that and I thought, I cannot end up here. I can't go this far anyway. And I would talk to her, and she would say, well, here's what I think we should do, and this and that. And it got kind of weird after about 6 months. I would come home and she'd be crying, and I thought, well, I'm no prize at this point, so maybe she's, upset with me about something and trying to figure out why she was crying. She would never tell me for about a month or so, but every night it seemed like she was crying. What I didn't realize at the time was the Lord was convicting her for living with me, and he was after her heart. And she just got to the point where she couldn't bear it, to be, in this adulterous life with this guy who was aimless, beside the point. So one night I come home, and it's about a week before Christmas, 1988, I want to say. She goes, I'm leaving. I'm going back to Coeur d'Alene. I can't do this. She says, the Lord has convicted me. What I'm doing is sinning, living with you, and I'm going to Coeur d'Alene. And at that moment, I thought to myself, where do I want to be? I kind of like her. I think I could probably spend the rest of my life with her, maybe. This is better than the alternative of starting all over again. So I told her, I said, listen, you go back to Coeur d'Alene. I'll be there right before Christmas. We'll figure this thing out. I said, we can get, wasn't even a proposal. I kind of just said, we could probably get married. That was my commitment to the whole situation. So she goes back home, and I tell her the plan, and this is what I was really thinking. I told her, I said, okay, you want to go to church, I'll go with you, we'll get married, and then you can get over this conviction that you have about us living together. In my mind, what I was really saying is, we'll get married, because I probably can't do any better, she's okay. She can go to church, I'll stay home and watch football. This is a perfect life. I can do that at this point in my life. So she goes back to Coeur d'Alene. I come back a couple days before Christmas. I tell her that. She goes, okay, that sounds good. But she goes, you have to do something for me. I go, okay, what? She goes, you have to go to church with me back in Seattle. Right after Christmas, we're going back. She had been going with some friends, and they had told her, in fact, I think Kathy at that point was praying against the evil boyfriend of her, that, because they surrounded, Sandy was the girl's name. And so they were trying to protect her from me. And she goes, I want you to meet these people, and I want you to come to church. Okay, so after Christmas, it's New Year's Eve on a Saturday night, and their church service is on Saturday night, so we've got a church service on New Year's Eve, Saturday night, after we spend Christmas in Coeur d'Alene and come back. And she goes, you have to go. And I go, that's New Year's Eve. I mean, I've hardly been in a church other than the Mormon church once in a while, not very often. And I said, that's weird going on Saturday night, especially New Year's Eve. Aren't these people have plans to do something on New Year's Eve? She goes, yeah, go to church. That's what they do. So I said, okay. Reluctantly, I kind of agreed to it. I thought this is part of my devious plan I had, to just put her at bay a little bit and make her think that I was supportive of her and whatnot. And I said, okay, we'll go to church. So the church is Maranatha Campus Ministries. It was kind of like what was your dad involved in?
Campus Crusade.
Campus Crusade. It was like Campus Crusade, only the difference was they weren't a parachurch organization. They actually started churches. So this was a campus church. And their motto was, save the campus, save the world. So they wanted to get college students all over the world saved, and then they would go and be their own missionaries. Great plan, worked pretty well. But anyway, I walk into this room on New Year's Eve, Saturday night, and it's wild. I mean, they're dancing and raising their hands and really charismatic worship, and I just walk in sheepishly, and we find a seat, and I'm sitting there. And a couple people come up and introduce themselves to me, and they say, how you doing? And kind of try to blend in and hide into the crowd a little bit. Well, they had an itinerant guy, because Maranatha had several churches, so they would have guys that are part of the organization go around with different giftings, and whatnot, and speak at churches. Well, this particular night, I had a guy named Bob Martin, and Bob lived down in California somewhere, but he was part of the Maranatha, team. And he had a real pastoral gift, but also a kind of a prophetic gift too. So I couldn't tell you to this day what the message was that he was preaching. I was trying to stop my ears probably, and not paying attention very much, just nervous sitting there. And it's obviously an evangelical church, so there's an altar call at the end of his sermon. And he didn't make people walk down the aisle or anything, but in your, the old motto, in your head, your eyes closed, head down, type thing, raise your hand. And I do, to this day, I don't know what I was thinking, but I raised my hand. And I don't know why I raised my hand. At the time, I didn't know why I raised my hand. I do now, but at the time, I just kind of like mechanically, it just went up, and I thought, "What? Get down! Get down!" What is going on? I had no idea. And Sandy looks over at me, and she didn't know either. She's going, "Oh my goodness, is this real?" And he goes, "Okay, great." And I thought, okay, I don't know what I just did, but my hand went up. Well, this is where it got real interesting at this point. And he's going along, and he starts praying for people, and he looks at me, and I'm kind of, still deer in the headlights going, what just happened to me? Why did I raise my hand? He goes, come here. He says, God wants to show you how much he loves you. And he called me up. And I thought, oh God, no, please don't. But I got up out of my chair and I walked up and I sat down. He had a chair sitting there. And he set me down in the chair. He goes, I remember this so clearly. I'm gonna lose it here. I don't have a sub. Like you were for donating money. I'm gonna have to wait a second. Because I want you to sit down in this chair. And he goes, I want you to know that God loves you, and he's going to demonstrate it to you. And he asked me to lift my feet up. And I'm just going, okay, I'm along for the ride now. So I lift my feet up, and he puts his hands under my heels, and I look down, and one of my feet is 2 inches shorter than the other. I grab the back of the chair, and I'm sitting there, and I'm going, how can that be? What's going on? Why is one of my legs shorter than the other? And he goes, I'm going to pray for you, and God's going to demonstrate to you how much he loves you. And as soon as he prayed, I looked down, and my leg went boom. And I came out of the chair, sobbing, crying, snot all over me. Grabbed Bob, who's not a big guy, grabbed him, bear hugged him, just was bawling on his top of his head, blowing snot all over him. And I felt the weight of all that sin come off of me, and the whole issue of identity, the doubt being lifted. And I knew I met the Lord, and God loved me without a doubt. Without any theology, without even knowing what the message was that he preached. It was just demonstrated. And so I went sit down. I'm trying to compose myself, trying to rationalize what happened. Don't know. Just know the freedom and the feeling of joy and grace that I was experiencing at the moment. And I thought, okay, that's it. It's the end of the evening. Go home, and it's not going to be what I planned, obviously. It's going to be totally different. But we weren't done quite yet. He goes, come here. He called me up again. He called up this girl, and I was telling Kathy, I don't know what happened to this girl. I don't remember seeing her again in our church services afterwards. But he basically told her the same thing, set her down. He goes, I want you to pray for her. So I put her hand in my hand like this, and he goes, go ahead and pray. And I look at him like, what am I supposed to say? And I said, God. That's all I said. And I watched her leg go like this, and right in my fingers, and grow. And she had the same reaction I did. She melted into a puddle of tears, jumped up, grabbed Bob, hugged him. And that's the last time I ever saw her. I don't know what happened, but I hope she has the same experience that I had and was freed. So at that point, Sandy and I's relationship kind of went back and forth. She ended up meeting another guy in the church, Eric. We became friends. Kathy and I were both in their wedding. Eric was in our wedding. We hadn't talked to him in quite a while, but had kept them pretty close there for years. They're still over in Tacoma area now, I think. And then kind of had spent the rest of those years unpacking what happened that night and trying to explain it and put a definition on it, I guess. And through Reformed theology and understanding the sovereignty of God, came to realize that I didn't have to understand the message or even know what was going on at the time. God brought me to a place where he wanted me and saved me, and the rest has been unpacking the grace of God and what happened that night. And it's been pretty amazing ride. Met Kathy through or got closer to Kathy through a circumstance. Kathy was the nanny for the pastor at the time. Well, a family was moving in the church and they needed some help, so I came, and the lift gate on the moving truck was swung it over, and it came down and clipped the end of my toe off and broke my toe, and so I was in a cast. So Kenny, the pastor, at the time, who was scheming this, I know, invited me over to spend a week there so I would be cared for, because I lived with, this is the other weird thing, I moved into the guys, somewhat of a fraternity house. It's a frat house where the church had single guys living, and I moved in with them. So I went from an adulterous relationship to living in a house with a bunch of my brothers, and because they were into discipleship and accountability at that point, which was really good for me. I needed it at the time. Anyway, Kenny the pastor didn't want me to die in the house because he knew those guys would take care of me. So he invited me there, and Kathy kind of took care of me at the time. And then he had me build a shower at his place, which took me 3 months to build. It was about a 4-day job. And spent some extra time getting to know Kathy there. So God's setup and circumstances are always amazing when you look in the rearview mirror. But anyway, got together with Kathy, and she finally agreed to marry me. And today's our 34th wedding anniversary. So it's a good life, very good life. From an aimless, hedonistic sinner to being pulled out and saved, the Lord is good. Amen. Very good. And there's still unpacking. I had a lot of anger issues after that, raising our kids and stuff. It's just stuff that has been in my heart that the Lord has been dealing with over the years. But I thought about that this week, that football coach that said, "You're cut." And the irony is not lost on me that I got saved on a college campus where I got rejected. And the Lord said, "I will never cut you." And so that's my story.
Amen.
That's it.